LinkedIn Echo Chamber. This is ML's Like Team Spirit. This week I've got Matt back with me. Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. Thanks for joining. Thank you for the support. Matt, this year, one of my goals is to capture insights from data leaders. So thank you for joining. Last time we spoke about a bit more like a week in the life of Matt, and you explained what your role is and what you do in it. I wanted to pick this week at something more specific. So last time you told me about some of the skills that help you as a chief data officer, and you talked about your problem solving skills. I remember you explaining that you get along because you kind of don't accept that there's no answer. So you were able to focus on really coming out with good solutions early in your career. But for this interview, I would love to capture something around what are the skills that you've had to develop. So problem solving you always had. There's something else there, some other sets of skills that have like helped you get along in your working career over the 20 years. So let's pick at that, please. If I said, Matt, like, what would be one thing that you feel you've really that's developed a lot, or that you've got a stronger intuition for, that's helped you get through your career? What would be something that's developed?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is around how do you take the people that you're working with, the non-data folk in kind of businesses, particularly kind of key stakeholders, and how do you take them on the journey with you? So ultimately, you've got 101 people asking you for questions, pieces of information, answers, things like that. But actually, how do you make sure that they are with you from day one, and particularly for things that are going to take time? How do you continue to kind of keep them engaged, keep them interested, so that kind of hopefully you're getting them what they need to be able to make a difference to the business. B, they don't feel like you've kind of just disappeared and they're not really sure what the kind of data function in their kind of business is potentially doing. And kind of C, you've also just got that visibility of there's always going to be something pressing, something that is on the minds of managing director, a CFO, kind of chief digital officer, whoever it is. And can you actually make sure that you really understand what that is, and you're helping them to get answers to that, rather than doing all the kind of little things around the edges, but not actually helping them get to the crux of what they see as their biggest challenge or their biggest problem.
So what have you learned that means that you know all this? So if I ask you for some reflection, in your younger days, you were the problem solver, probably very focused, working on something quite specific. What you've just said there is you've learned all this, how to engage others, keep them informed, keep them excited about projects. So what is it in sort of your observations that you've learned, or what skills have developed over the 20 years so that you do that effectively?
Yeah, and I think there's a number of things. I think when you kind of start out working in the kind of business world, one of the things that a lot of kind of senior people will tell you quite early on is you need to underpromise, you need to over-deliver, you need to focus on making sure that kind of what you commit to is achievable, and then you need to come back and go, wow, here it is, sort of thing. And the tendency there is then you take a piece of work, you understand what it is, you disappear off, squirrel away, try and get it done, and then come back and go, ta-da, kind of here it is. And while, yes, that meets the kind of brief of what you've been told there, what it doesn't really do is help those stakeholders in the meantime, because ultimately what they're doing is going, I asked for something, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. I'm now twiddling my fingers, waiting for it. I don't really know when it's going to arrive, or I've been set a deadline of when it's going to arrive, but kind of I don't know anything in between. And what I've very much learned is actually you really need to build those relationships, sort of thing, and that's through a kind of a wide range of different ways. But ultimately, what you want to be doing is constantly feeding that stakeholder with nuggets of information, partly as a kind of course correction method of basically it allows you to be able to go, is what we're doing right? Is this going in the right direction? Is this actually answering the questions that you want? Partly because it keeps them interested and they go, yeah, great, that's really good. That's exactly what we want to be doing. Partly it means that actually they feel like they're involved. And particularly when you've got multiple stakeholders, some of the time, those updates to kind of stakeholders aren't even about things that you're doing for them. But actually, by you sharing, oh, we've just done this, or we've just discovered this for X person, what it allows them to do is go, right, actually, I understand what the data team are working on, I understand what's going on, and therefore I understand why this thing that I've asked for is taking a little bit longer, because you're juggling lots of balls, and kind of actually I can see the value that what you're doing is adding to the business, and therefore kind of I feel like I'm part of it, sort of thing. So to me, it's very much about how do you kind of build those stages in, and the way that I've ended up doing it, it completely varies in that I'm always an early bird into the office. So one of the advantages that I have there is actually a lot of senior stakeholders are too. And at the last few companies that I've worked at, it's always been a fairly open plan kind of setup, which basically means when you go in early in the morning, you'll bump into the CFO, you'll bump into the chief people officer, you'll bump into all of those senior stakeholders, and actually you can just have a conversation. It doesn't need to be anything formal. It doesn't need to be something that has been prearranged. But what it allows you to do is almost get a penny for their thoughts, understand what's kind of going on, but also just share, oh yeah, last week we did X, or did you know so-and-so has just done this yesterday? And it allows them to feel like they actually have an understanding of what you're working on.
Matt, for younger folk or for folks that aren't early birds, like is there any little tricks and techniques you're using around your, I don't know, written communications or other methods just to kind of keep that flow of information going?
Yeah, I think it's identify who are the key people that you need to be spending that time with, and what you need to work out is for you and for them, what are the ways to be able to do that. It may be that in your office everyone has lunch at a set time, and so actually being able to time when you go to lunch so that actually you're going to end up having those conversations with their stakeholders, it works. It may be that you diarize something with them on a weekly, fortnightly, whatever kind of frequency it is that you want to do basis, so that you're then having those interactions, particularly for people that are in other offices or kind of other locations. That's something that I found I had to do, because actually the only way for you to make sure that you had that time was to have something physically in the diary so that you could have those catch-ups. Yes, you can do things around them, but at least you know, as a minimum, I'm going to speak to X in 3 days' time or kind of next week. Part of it also is just actually, if something interesting happens, how do you share it? Is there something you can send around by email, or you can share on Teams, or you can kind of promote in some way to kind of go, have you seen this? And actually, so at my kind of most recent company, one of the things that they had was a weekly stand-up. So actually, were the things that we could share to be put into that allowed people to then go, oh, interesting, I didn't know that was going on. Because you're often working for a set of stakeholders, but not necessarily for everyone across the business. But I think there's also an element of, just when you're working through something, you want to make sure that people understand kind of how it is progressing, and kind of what is going on, and what have you or the team been working on that means they're going to get what they want out of the end of it. So and sometimes it may be actually there was this really complex piece that needed to be done of coding or tidying up a kind of data field, or doing something that to the stakeholder is probably quite mundane, but actually explained in simple terms to them of, we weren't able to move forward with X because Y wasn't in a state to be able to do it. So what we've spent is a number of hours tidying that up, sorting that, getting it working. I mean, an example that I often give is when I worked at Eurostar, one of the issues we had was twofold. One was people booked return tickets, but the tickets were not connected. So we had to find a way to connect the outbound ticket to the return ticket. And the second one was most of them didn't have times for the trains. So it told you that you were getting the 9112 to Paris on the 25th of July, but it didn't tell you what time it was at. And so actually there was a lot of things there that you needed to pull in to actually make the data kind of meaningful to people. And so actually that was a fairly major piece of work that we needed to do, to go, actually, how do we standardize that information so that it can be used? And explaining that to the stakeholders that were going, actually, the output I want to know is how many times has X customer traveled with us. So, well, until we can tell you that kind of, yes, they've traveled on 17 trains, but actually that was 9 trips or that was 17 trips, it's two very different situations, sort of thing. So it was something that kind of you could explain to them, they could understand, they could grasp, they could actually appreciate, oh yeah, that's probably not your fault. That's a fault of how we set the data up originally, and actually there are things we can do to improve that. But yes, you needed to fix that.
Yeah, this is some of my reflections also. Saying like the data is bad sounds a bit of a cop out. Um, when you say something like when we replatformed in 2017, that you well remember because you were the lead in that area, it meant that we lost a column. And they'll go, yes, now I remember when we replatformed and it was in my team. Yes. So there's certain ways you can describe things as to what the business did that then explains why the data might be how it is, or some other problem like this. So Matt, we're getting into bugs and troubleshooting. Can I ask you, the buck stops with you as head of department. So if a project were going bad or not going well, have you any tips for anybody as to rescuing something that's failing a bit? You've told us how to get along, increase communication, find opportunities to keep people warm. What about when things are going bad? Like you don't have to admit that you ever were part of this, but if you were part of a failing project, like what tips would you have, or how would you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely nothing's ever gone wrong in any team I've ever worked in. Honest, no, yeah, it's definitely something that happens. I think there's a few elements to me. One is picking that up as early as possible. It's very easy for you to almost kind of try and ignore it and go, oh, we'll pick it back up, we'll get back on track, it'll be fine. Whereas actually realizing that problem as early as possible is going to be the most helpful way, because otherwise you could lose weeks or months further on it, sort of thing. I think part of it is taking a step back and actually going, what is the problem? Is the problem the people working on it? Is it the understanding of the problem? Is it the direction that's been taken? Is it something to do with the data? And therefore, kind of, what are the potential solutions? And then I think another key one is, we're talking about stakeholders here, is engage them and get a really good understanding from them of going, well, okay, we've hit this challenge, or things have gone this way. The options we've got for resolving it are X, Y, Z, because a lot of the time you don't want to have to go, right, we'll just reboot and almost start again, because that could be days, weeks, months that you've lost of potential time. And actually half the time, it's not all lost effort, but there may be particular decisions you need to make to go, actually, we can resolve this and we can kind of get through it by doing X, Y, or Z. And part of it is very much around understanding what's required versus kind of aiming for perfection. In that it's very easy for you when you start a project to go, we're going to get to here and everything's going to work and it's going to all look really, really good, and it's going to do everything that we want. Whereas as you work through things, there are always going to be decisions you have to make. And kind of, there was a recent example about a year ago where we were building an extensive data model. And one of the key things that we had to work through was there are areas where parts of this data model don't quite work, where fields are kind of not 100% reliable, or kind of things don't quite work beyond a certain date. And what we needed to work through was get stakeholders, get key people from the team that are using that data together and go, how big a deal is that? Is that something that we need to go, no, for that field, we have got to fix it, make sure it works completely, otherwise we can't work with it? Or is it something that we go, actually, the difference there is something where we've lost decimal places, or we've kind of, something's gone that actually, unless we're looking at this in minute detail, which we're not going to do because we're doing analysis over a wide range of data, it's fine for us to accept. Or actually, the data is fine going back to 2017, and realistically, we don't care about what happened 10 years ago. So we can accept that and we'll caveat it, make sure people are aware. But actually, as long as people know what the kind of guardrails are, they can work with that data to their heart's content and they're not going to experience any problems.
Good, Matt. Well, thanks for taking us through all that. Look, the time goes quickly, Matt. We're about to hit our time limit, so thank you for those insights today. I think the key ones I take away is making the most of your opportunities for communication to get along. So doing that more and more will help if you're going through the ranks in the data industry. And on the rescuing a data project, it's a bit like bringing the stakeholders in to understand remedial action, which one you can pick, and how it changes either the certainty or the timescales. Stakeholders might just shrug and be like, I want it as quick as possible, even if it's uncertain. And then at least you know which direction to take. So these are all useful insights. So Matt, thanks for taking us through all that. Ladies and gents, this has been ML's Like Teen Spirit.